So welcome everyone to Next Practice Institute. My name's Amy Fox and I'm the founder of Mobius Executive Leadership. And this afternoon session I decided to call The Poet and the Mystic, a transformational conversation, but then I realized it's hard to tell which is which. So I'm tremendously delighted to welcome you all to a very unique dialogue. Those of you who spent the day with David are in for an enormous treat to have a chance to study and explore with our mystical teacher, Thomas Huebl. And those of you who spent the day with Thomas are about to hear the extraordinary wisdom and beauty of our friend David Whyte. And they're in for a real treat because they don't know each other yet. So this is going to be a very emergent dialogue. So I'm going to turn it over to them and we'll take our journey together. So thank you both for being here. Oh.
I'm only glad she didn't choose the title of The Saint and the Sinner.
And then to find out who is who.
No, I think it would have been readily apparent.
Thank you.
But speaking of the saint and the sinner, I think one of the extraordinary necessities of human life and the disciplines of a human life is in not choosing between poles that we're often invited towards to divide ourselves. And one of the great divisions, especially around spirituality, is the question of do I only focus on this endless internal world? And when do I come out of that internal world to work in the world? And I think Thomas is a marvelous representation of someone who's done powerful inner work and who's bringing that to bear in a very practical and very enlightening way on the necessities of the strategic world. But ultimately, I don't think we get to choose between them. And this is the poem I read at the beginning of the session the other night, called The Bell and the Blackbird. The monk at the edge of the monastic precinct hearing the call to prayer, hearing the call to prayer and saying that's the most beautiful sound in the world, and at the same time hearing the blackbird outside in the world and saying that's also the most beautiful sound. And the way we actually have to both be invited into this new world at the same time as we are fully participating in this world. I just took part in this year's annual TED conference, which was on the future. But so many visions of the future are adolescent hopes for escape from the present, and especially from the heartbreak of the present. And really, you only have a future when you come into the heartbreak and ground of this life and this inheritance which Thomas works with, so this traumatic inheritance that we all share, that Thomas works with so eloquently. So this is The Bell and the Blackbird. The sound of a bell still reverberating, the sound of a bell still reverberating, or a blackbird calling from a corner of a field, asking you to wake into this life, asking you to wake into this life, or inviting you deeper into the one that waits, or inviting you deeper into the one that waits. Either way takes courage. Either way wants you to be nothing but that self that is no self at all. Wants you to walk to the place where you find you already know how to give every last thing away. The approach that is also the meeting, without any meeting at all. That radiance you have always carried with you. That radiance you have always carried with you as you walk both alone and completely accompanied in friendship by every corner of the world crying Alleluia. The approach that is also the meeting, without any meeting at all. That radiance you have always carried with you that radiance, you have always carried with you as you walk both alone and completely accompanied in friendship by every corner of creation, crying, Alleluia.
That's beautiful.
Good, thank you.
What can you add? It's so maybe the next poem.
No, I think you have one. The poles between the outer and the supposedly inner world.
Yeah, so first of all, I very much agree with many things you're saying, and as Amy said, we just met a few minutes over lunch, and but immediately there was a very strong resonance, and also now when I hear your poem, I think there's so much, like we talked in the afternoon session here about how can my life be in a place where the depletion of my battery and the recharging of my battery are not two. Mm-hmm. So that how can, when we go through life and we say, oh, I was in a difficult meeting, I had a strange situation, I felt depleted. So then our battery charge gets reduced, and it seems like we get more tired, depleted. But actually, I think in what you're saying, that we don't get to choose, that there is no, the cave and the marketplace are not two. And I think for everybody like us that are not choosing to go to a cave, literally, that the challenge lies within the fact that there is no vacation. That like, what does it mean? Can I live my life as if there was no vacation time? And that's like a research question that I'm working with. How can we live in such a conscious and precise way that compassion, clarity, presence, groundedness, and so many factors are part of our everyday life, that my vacation is not there to get me recharged. My vacation is there to do fun things, to be with my family, with my partners, to do new things, or to deepen my meditation. And so we explored in the afternoon the possibility. What does it mean and what does it need from us to live a life that is so process aware that there is no other moment, there is no carry-on luggage from this moment to the next. So that's an interesting question.
Yeah. Being with my new Austrian friend Thomas here reminds me of being with my old Austrian friend, Brother David Stendhal-Rast, many years ago. And he was coming to see me one evening, but that day I'd had a really traumatic experience of complete and utter exhaustion. And of course, it's never just a moment. You usually realize you're exhausted after this cumulative effect of the stress of months. And it became apparent when in the small non-profit organization that I was working in, where I was running from pillar to post and from receptionist to filing cabinet to telephone, and I appeared in the door of this meeting room where everyone else was gathering for a meeting. It was very unusual that I wasn't a part of the meeting, but everyone else was there. But I stood in the doorway, and I was on my way to, and I out of nowhere, I said in a very loud voice, "Excuse me, but has anyone seen David?" And there was a moment of stunned incomprehension, because I was the only David who worked in the place, you know. And unconsciously I was looking for myself, you know. I wonder if anyone had seen me, you know, because I hadn't seen me. But everyone burst out laughing, and I stood there, and I was laughing with them. But of course, inside was this humiliation that was occurring. But humiliation in that wonderful old Latin sense of the word, meaning returned to the ground of your being, humus, humiliation, yeah. where any fancy abstract ideas about yourself are shorn away in the moment. And in that moment, I realized I was completely and utterly and totally exhausted. Yeah. And I realized I couldn't do another thing. And luckily, I lived near the building. I walked out of the building, I walked to the house where I lived, which overlooked the waters of Puget Sound, and I sat at the kitchen table, just completely and utterly spent. Yeah. And there was a bottle of wine on the table. And no, listeners, I did not drink it right then. But, it reminded me that this very special friend of mine, Brother David, was coming in the evening, and we used to get together and read the great German-speaking poet Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, and Brother David would read it in the original German, and then we would translate it together, and we would drink the red wine with it. Because Benedictine monks always insist on that. Yeah. There's a close relationship with that ancient mythological deity called alcohol in the Benedictine. And so I was so happy he was coming, because he was the nearest thing I had to a wise person in my life. And so we sat down with our books and with the wine, and before he was looking at Rilke, but I said, Brother David, I said, like Cahill Gibran, I said, speak to me of exhaustion. I said, tell me about exhaustion. And he looked at me to see if I was serious, and he saw that I was. And he said, you know, the antidote to exhaustion is not necessarily rest. I said, the antidote to exhaustion is not necessary. I said, what is the antidote to exhaustion? He said, the antidote to exhaustion is wholeheartedness. You're so exhausted, you're so hung out to dry, you're so finished because you're doing so many things that you're only 50 or 60% involved with, you know. Your heart is only. And he knew at the time that I was ready to go full-time as a poet, and I hadn't quite done it, you know. And he said, you're hanging on the vine, you know, you're ripe on the vine, but you will rot on the vine if the time passes, yeah. If the tide in the affairs of men and women passes you by, as Shakespeare said, yeah. So that was a life-changing moment, and first of all, I started to take on this discipline that Thomas alluded to, of making sure that everything I did, I actually could do wholeheartedly, and giving away things to other people who could do them wholeheartedly, or thought they could, were under the illusion they could, yeah. And taking things to me and then I did that within the work, and I said, if I can do it here, I can do it anywhere, actually. And that was the prelude to actually stepping out into the world, this what can you do wholeheartedly, yeah. And then you get to that next step, and there's that wonderful book which says, do what you love, the money will come. And I've always thought the first part of the title was true. Because they never say how long it takes. But then we're asked to go through what I call, you know, when you first step into this discipline of wholeheartedness, is you have to go through this radical simplification. Yeah? And you have to give away a lot of the things, not only that you're doing, but that you're spending on. You actually have to simplify your life so that you can actually be wholehearted. Yeah? And I know you went through a very powerful period of simplification in the silence. You went to a remote place, yeah, into a farmhouse. Do you want to say a word about that radical simplification, you know, the wholeheartedness that you found in that?
Yeah, just to fill you in, like at the end of my medical studies, or somewhere at the end, in the last third, I suddenly had the feeling, okay, that's not it, and I need I felt I need something else, and that something else I need to discover in silence. So, and that was the beginning of a 4-year meditation retreat. So I went for 4 years and was meditating almost every day or every day on different intensities, but sometimes the whole day. And I really started to explore what was important for me, like the lens of consciousness and the different dimensions of human consciousness and the difficulties of exploring human consciousness. So yeah, I didn't know at the beginning that it will be 4 years, but it lasted 4 years, and it was a very deep simplification.
Yes.
Yes, and it was for me, most probably the most important time of my life, because like within the simplicity of just being able to detox myself from myself, you know,
Yes.
but without like dissociating myself, like dissociating inside, but just to really be there and notice what it means to be, to come back to a state of being,
Yes.
and let everything go and literally look at everything. And also I felt I somehow was at that time blessed with being guided. So I had a very strong guidance through the 4 years of my meditative journey, which ended up in a very strong opening experience. And yeah, I know that this is the foundation of my work today. This is where I learned the most about the lens of consciousness, about silence, about the light, about information, about capacities that I believe many of the scriptures talk about in the different traditions.
Yes.
So,
Do you remember any one particular turning point?
yes, I had one particular turning point was like the most profound experience that I had in these 4 years that changed radically my notion of reality, my notion of life, or whatever. The way I experienced life before and after was completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so, and then life somehow, after that time of being very kind of immersed and still and traveling the lands of the inner territory of life, somehow life changed and life picked me and brought me to teach like 15 years ago. And since then I do what I do. I travel around and my life completely changed from one moment to another. I found myself with a suitcase. Another 4 years I spent with a suitcase and a computer bag, and I traveled throughout the whole world. And I worked with, I don't know, thousands of people and learned about, and still learn about the refinement of the human process. Mm-hmm. And that's what's my passion today. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a very important part was, and that's what I often talk about in courses, how do we create an interior environment where we are able to listen to the whisper of the future. Mm-hmm. I loved what you said at the beginning. There is we often want a future in order to escape, and that the wish to grow into a future is actually a complaint about now.
Yes.
And there only in being here now we get the blessing of emergence, mm-hmm. like of the real future. And I loved when you mentioned that. That's really very beautiful.
Yeah. Lovely.
So and I think like in fields, when I walked in here this morning, and I just arrived today here, and then I walked in and I think the preciousness of a field like here and other fields like that, but the field, what we do together and how we allow like ourselves and each other with, like as a group, we allow an experiment to happen, a human experiment to explore consciousness. And I think that's a very precious asset. That we practice with each other, and we make mistakes, we find out new things, we learn through creativity and through the stuff that works and it doesn't work. I think that's something that we need to honor. And when I walked in here this morning, I felt a lot of depth and a lot of preparation and a lot of centuries of therapy sitting in a room. Centuries of meditation practice. And but I think that that's really something very special, and I think it needs to be used in the most precious way. And so if people already created an interior where we are able to listen to the future, like the whisper, the subtlety of the future, the real future, I think that's very precious. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Do you consider that you still have a spiritual discipline, or is it so part of you from that 4 years? Do you take time to set aside to actually meditate, or you feel you have it within your body and you're walking around in such a foundational way that you don't need to?
Both.
Both, yes.
I love to sit.
Yes.
And most of my meditation became like relation, because I work almost all the time. So like in the contemplation, my meditation became a meditation for many people that I work with, because I also use them. First of all, my life is very intense, most probably like your life, and but I use my meditation time to usually work with people that are in serious health issues, and so I transformed my sitting, except I feel I need to sit, so then I sit in silence, and but my meditation became kind of a healing service, because I love healing and I love to explore the nature of healing. So I work often with people that have serious health issues in my meditations.
Yes, yeah. And I think one of the interesting illusions around meditation to begin with is that you're going to this place of absolute stillness, when in actual fact you're joining the tidal seasonality of the world. You know, it's moving, and you're moving, and you're asked to cultivate this relationship with the tidal seasonal part of yourself too, and to have an identity which is moving, which is hard to name. And the invitation is always, to me, further and further into heartbreak, in the way that I spoke the other day, that we don't have any choice about having our heart broken. There's no sincere path a human being can take without that happening. So it's great just to get with the program and stop trying to find a path, where you won't have your heart broken. And you have your heart broken because you care about something. So this is a piece I wrote, which was an invitation from a woman I got to know. She's a woman who's actually a carved face in a stone in Ireland. And I first came across this face over 20 years ago, and as I walked past it, I suddenly realized it was there. I hadn't realized it was there, and it's one of these old Irish carvings. It could be 1,000 years old, it could be 1,500 years old. And it's an Irish meme. It's this long Irish face, and it's always associated with the face of a woman. Shielnagig, as it's called in the Irish tradition. But it's just there in this stone plinth. It's been gathered up from the fields and put there for safety. But she's just facing the weather. And if she was in this country, she'd be in a glass enclosed box with gold light falling on her. And but here she's just out in the Irish weather, being worn away. And the first time I walked past her, I felt like that experience we've all had, where you're walking, you hear something, and you walk 3 paces further and you realize it was something that was said to you that was really important. And you turn and you say, what did I just hear? And so I walked back in front of her, and I couldn't recall what. I stood there in silence, and I couldn't understand what she was saying. And I stood there for the longest time, because my whole thing is that I get it. That's my artistic job in life, is to stand there, understand it, and then say it, as a poet. So it was really disturbing that I couldn't get it even to say it. And so I left, and I was really, I said, that's amazing. There was something there that I wasn't ready for. And so every time I went up to this place, it's at a place called Thoba Fodric. I read you the poem the other night about the well itself. This is just below. I would, after I'd been to the well, I would go down and pay my respects to this woman. and stand there and see if she would speak to me this year. Yeah? And sometimes I go up 2 or 3 times in a year and I'd be no wiser. Yeah? And this went on for a good few years, and then probably after about 5 years I got into this habit of just going and not knowing and not expecting to know what she was saying. Just like every other relation, why should it be different than, just pretend that you nod your head and yes. But I wasn't getting it. And then I got hold of myself after about 10 years of going there, and I said, no, you're actually supposed to understand what she said to you. Yeah. And so every time I'd have this very private conversation, even if I was up there with other people, I never told anyone else about this secret relationship. And then after 20 years of going up there, I went up with a camera woman who was making a film of me, and she'd been looking through this camera lens at me the whole week. Yeah. And I'd been speaking through this lens. And during that week, I felt like I'd made a real breakthrough with the camera. And I suddenly had an intimacy with it that I had not had before. Yeah. And when we got up to the face, she got down on her knees and put the camera right up against the face, because it's such an astonishing face. And this is the same lens, that I had been looking through all week. And it was just as if I was the face looking through the lens. And suddenly I knew what she was saying and what she had been saying, and why I hadn't wanted to hear it, hadn't wanted to hear it. Yeah. So this is called Stone, and it's really about the difficulty of incarnation. I do believe that none of us can quite understand why there's so much loss and trauma and disappearance in the world. Yeah. And that human beings have every right to turn their face away from the conversation and to say, God, if that's the game you want to play, I'm not going to play it. I'm going to make my own abstracted conversation in which, even though I don't feel fully, I'm protected by that abstraction from real pain. Yeah. And this woman was inviting me back, and inviting me further into this. Yeah. So there's a mention of Loch Ina, which means the Lake of Ivy in Irish, which is up in Connemara, where I spent a lot of time. There's a mention of rivers of earth moving beneath my feet. That's an earthquake that I experienced in South America years ago that really rocked my sense of what I took for granted in the world. Yeah. But I more or less explained it, so this is stone. The face in the stone is a mirror looking into you. The face in the stone is a mirror looking into you. You have gazed at the moving waters. You have seen the slow light in the sky above Loch Ina. Beneath you, streams have flowed, and rivers of earth have moved beneath your feet. But you have never looked into the immovability of stone like this. The way it holds you, gives you not a way forward, but a doorway in. Staunches your need to leave, becomes faithful by going nowhere. Becomes faithful by going nowhere. Something that wants you to stay here and look back, be weathered by what comes to you. Something that wants you to stay here and look back, be weathered by what comes to you, like the way you too have come from so far away to be here, once reluctant, but now as solid and as here and as willing to be touched as everything you have found. The face in the stone is a mirror looking into you, is a mirror looking into you. You have gazed at the moving waters. You have gazed at the moving waters. You have seen the slow light in the sky above Loch Ina. Beneath you, streams have flowed, and rivers of earth have moved beneath your feet. But you have never looked into the immovability of stone like this. The way it holds you, gives you not a way forward, but a doorway in. Gives you not a way forward, but a doorway in. Staunches your need to leave, becomes faithful by going nowhere. something that wants you to stay here and look back, be weathered by what comes to you, like the way you too have come from so far away to be here, once reluctant, but now as solid and as here and as willing to be touched as everything you have found.
Beautiful. I want to highlight something that you said that I think is it's deeply important for me, but I think it's deeply important for us. Is you spoke about the heartbreak as a way here, as a way into now.
Yes.
And I think this message needs to be highlighted because, like we live in a time where it seems like that we are exposed to almost any information that is out there. But at the same time, I believe we are also living in a time where we are not really experiencing the information that we are exposed to. And that the perpetuation of trauma, of the history of humanity that sits here with us, in us, through us, transmitted from one generation to the next, is the very thing that prevents us from being a contemporary witness. And so we are, one of my even if it sounds a bit strange, but one of my passions is to find a way how we are literally, or how we are really contemporary global witnesses. And I think this is, everything is in the sentence when we say, okay, how can I be here? I believe often when we read news, we didn't read it. When we hear about what happens in our neighborhood, we didn't hear it. Because I think the degree of which we are dissociated when we hear certain information, and that through spending global time, when global time is time that we spend on the internet, that we spend on Facebook, that we listen to news, that we are exposed to global information, is on the one hand great because the intensity of innovation and creativity that we can participate in is enormous, but also that the amount of trauma exposure that we are being exposed to is so high that most of it we cannot experience. And I think until we will be global social witnesses, like physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, socially, whatever, in many aspects of who we are, we have to perpetuate this pattern of re-traumatization. But if it finds a home in us, and this is where I believe, if we really feel what we hear every day, and we find a way to create community and also have an authentic exploration, not I have to experience because it anyway won't work, but if I become aware of how I'm not experiencing the information that I'm being exposed to, which is not just information that I'm being exposed to, which is the very experience that happens in the body that I'm a part of. It's not about in the Middle East they have their problems and in North Korea they have their problem. No, North Korea is in me. And it's our issue, it's not their issue. And I think that there is something very powerful in the transformation of incarnation, as you said, that the way how we become partners of the divine in the game that the divine plays. I think if we can deepen this very thing, it's a revelation and a revolution for the world. And I think all of it was in the sentence with the heartbreak. Because what we do to each other is heartbreaking. And what we did, and because it's not resolved, we're still doing it in the Holocaust, is heartbreaking, and in all kinds of other genocides and collective traumatizations. And I believe that heartbreak is absolutely necessary to be able to look into the heart of that action and come to a restoration. And so that's, I believe, the only way how we will get to know our real future.
Yes.
And not the repetition of the past.
Yes.
Because often I think when people talk about the future, they are not aware that they take the road from behind them and put it in front of themselves. So we are taking the road from here and placing it, and then we call it future. But it's actually just it's a stuck CD. And that's everything that I hear in your sentence. And the real meeting, we have to feel what we do in order to create a new world.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. You can. One can understand, this cultivation of optimism and a false kind of optimism, and positive thinking in all of these different ways as an escape for human beings, a natural need. That there must be a different way forward, where there must be a way that doesn't involve going into this heartbreak we've inherited, or the heartbreak in our own personal lives that we've experienced or even manufactured ourselves. So I think the rehabilitation of a lot of the qualities which are part of our prized inheritance, the inheritance of being able to despair fully. Despair is a very unfashionable quality at the moment, but it's part of our inheritance. It's the place where you pretend that you've given up, because you can't tell the story and you don't know how to tell the story, and you don't have any will left to tell the story. And so you lay it aside and you fall against something. We literally say you fall into despair. It's like falling in love, and the ground isn't there. But then in the old fairy stories, whenever the children were taken out into the woods to be killed, by the wicked stepmother and the hunter at her behest, Hansel and Gretel or whoever it is, you get this motif again and again of the children being left there because the hunter can't do it. He can't bring himself to kill the children. So he leaves them in the woods to die of starvation or whatever, but it's not him who's killing them. And then the children despair, but then the girl especially, always lays her head against a tree or a rock. And it's just when the tree or the rock takes her full weight that it speaks back to her and says, "What is it, my child? Why are you crying?" It's when you let something else other than your own will take your weight, you have the possibility of another ground from which to step forward into your life, to actually cultivate vulnerability, not to see it as a weakness, but as a faculty for understanding what kind of visible and invisible help you need to ask for. And it's really interesting, especially when I think of your work, to look at the word vulnerability, because in English it comes from the Latin vulneras, meaning wound. And it's literally, the way you're vulnerable is where you're open to the world whether you want to be or not. You're just made that way. And you can try and close it off, but then you won't be you. You close off your seeing and your hearing and your ability to ask for the right kind of help. So what would it be like to actually take vulnerability as a practice? even to take Heartbreak as a practice. Where it doesn't incapacitate us, actually. It builds our conversational ability to be compassionate. This is a piece I wrote coming across some other faces, actually, now I think about it. And the human face is so astonishing, you know? And representations of the human face are so astonishing too. And I mean, literally the way we face the world affects our future. I remember having two guests to my house, and one was a Jain monk friend of mine. He grew up as a Jain monk anyway in India. His name's Satish Kumar. He's quite famous in England, actually. He founded a whole college, and he ran an alternative magazine. And when he was around 18 or 19 years old, he walked around the whole world without a penny in his pocket, just relying on other people's hospitality, along with another friend. And he has the most hospitable face and the most invitational face. And he makes an incredible fundraiser, because you cannot say no to that face. And he walks into a room, the only way you'll get out of that room without writing a check is through the fire escape. So, because he's just got this incredible face. And he and a whole group of people were coming to my house, and I was welcoming people at the door. And my daughter, who was 7 years old at the time, was stood behind me, and she was so excited about all of these new guests coming. She'd never met Satish. And she was in that wonderful crossroads that little girls get into between complete and utter anticipation and excitement and absolute catatonic shyness. All at the same time. So she was holding onto my shirt at the back with her two little fists. And these two little fists were almost like a barometer of how she felt about each person who came along. And the more shy she was of a person, the more she gripped my shirt, and the tighter it was. You're welcome, I'd say. And Charlotte would hide, and then her little head would come out on this side and that, looking, and then some people she really liked, and people actually saw she was there. Yeah. Well, I tell you, towards the end of welcoming everyone, Satish came round the corner. I hadn't seen him for a good few years, and Charlotte had never met him in her life. And she let go of my shirt and ran down the gravel towards him, and she'd never met him before. Yeah. And it was just the way he was facing the world. Yeah. I said, isn't that incredible? Some people have come past and not even know she was there. Yeah. And then Satish may have grown as a Jain monk, but he has a great love of single malt whiskey. I said, Satish, there's a great whiskey in there, go in and, So he sat down, and our kitchen is this long table with a fireplace which is raised at one end, a tiled fireplace. And it's people's favorite place to sit is by the fire on the tiled place. Yeah. And there was a log fire in there. And Satish went down and sat by the fire, unbeknownst to me. But I was still welcoming people. And then someone came around the corner with a completely different face. It was a woman with a face that had been crushed by disappointment. But it was also the kind of disappointed face that was looking for more disappointment to corroborate its previous disappointment, yes. And of course, Charlotte I could hardly breathe at all. And she just hid behind me like this, yeah. And I said, you're very welcome, and go in. And of course she walked past. I said, my God, isn't that interesting? Just because of the way a person is looking at the world. Yeah? This woman doesn't even know what didn't run out to meet her. Yeah? She doesn't even know what was hiding from her. Yeah? And then I went in after and I looked, and by sheer coincidence, these two faces had sat on either side of the fire. And I looked at the two faces, I said, you know, those two faces have completely and utterly different futures. Just by the way they're actually looking out. This face is going to get all kinds of incredible help, both visible and invisible. Yeah. I would say invisible help is the help that you do not as yet know you need. You know? It comes out. If you're not paying attention, you'll walk right past it. So this is a piece I wrote about some faces that had that incredible invitation in them in a temple in the Himalayas. We walked in there, and we was at this place 10,000 feet up on the side of Annapurna, and in a little village called Braga. Very much visited now, but not when I first went there. And we all found ourselves in the vestibule, led there by this lay monk, you know, in his saffron robes and with his prayer beads. But we found ourselves in complete darkness, trying to find the one flashlight we had, you know, that would take us into this place. And we're in complete blackness, complete darkness. And I think I'm talking to one of my group members, but I'm not. I'm talking with the guardian figure to the temple, which is this frightening Vajrapati with a spear directed at me and drinking blood from a skull cup. And in the darkness, I suddenly became aware. My eyes got used to the dark, and I just about leapt out of my skin. But I saw that figure exactly as the carver meant me to see it. Yeah. And normally the interpretation in these temples is the Vajrapani, the diamond water figure, is there for you to keep your fears outside. But no, when I saw that figure, I felt that spear skewering the very fear I felt when I first saw the figure. And it's saying, bring that in too. Yeah. Bring that in. Exactly what you felt when you saw me. Exactly the way you're afraid of the world. Exactly the way you're reluctant to be here. Yeah. And at that moment we found the flashlight, and the monk led us in, and then we light all these yak butter lamps, and the whole place fills up with this dark, billowing yak butter incense. Yeah. And we bow, and we all look up at the same time. We see these incredible carved figures up on a plinth around, looking down on us. And it's like looking at 100 satishas, these amazing, compassionate faces. I was looking at these faces and looking at our faces, and I said, how is it you can get such love and compassion into solid wood like that? And our faces are so often set against the world, yeah? Our malleable faces are. So I wrote this piece to get to the bottom of it, and it's called The Faces at Braga. It's about that invitation into the vulnerability of what it means to be alive and to be fully here. Yeah. In monastery darkness, by the light of one flashlight, the old shrine room waits in silence. While beside the door we see the terrible figure, fierce eyes demanding, will you step through? And the old monk leads us, bent back, nudging blackness, prayer beads in the hand that beckons. We light the butter lamps and bow, eyes blinking in the pungent smoke, look up without a word, see faces in meditation, 100 faces carved above, eye lines wrinkled in the hand-held light. Such love in solid wood, taken from the hillsides and carved in silence, they have the vibrant stillness of those who made them. Engulfed by the past, they have been neglected, but through smoke and darkness, they are like the flowers we have seen growing through the dust of eroded slopes, their slowly opening faces turned towards the mountain. Carved in devotion, their eyes have softened through age, and their mouths curve through delight of the carver's hands. If only our own faces would allow the invisible carver's hands to bring the deep grain of love to the surface. If only our own faces would allow the invisible carver's hands to bring the deep grain of love to the surface. If only we knew, as the carver knew, how the flaws in the wood led his searching chisel to the very core, we would smile too, and not need faces immobilized by fear or the weight of things undone. When we fight with our failings, we ignore the entrance to the shrine itself and wrestle with the guardian, fierce figure on the side of good. And as we fight, our eyes are hooded with grief and our lips are dry with pain. If only we could give ourselves to the blows of the carver's hands. If only we could give ourselves to the blows of the carver's hands. The lines in our faces would be the trace lines of rivers, feeding the sea where voices meet, praising the features of the mountain and the cloud and the sky. Our faces would fall away. Our faces would fall away until we, growing younger toward death every day, until we, growing younger toward death every day, would gather all our flaws in celebration, to merge with them perfectly, impossibly, wedded to our essence, full of silence from the carver's hands. If only our own faces would allow the invisible carver's hands to bring the deep grain of love to the surface. If only we knew, as the carver knew, how the flaws in the wood led his searching chisel to the very core, we would smile too, and not need faces immobilized by fear or the weight of things undone. When we fight with our failings, we ignore the entrance to the shrine itself and wrestle with the guardian, fierce figure on the side of good. And as we fight, our eyes are hooded with grief and our lips are dry with pain. If only we could give ourselves to the blows of the carver's hands. The lines in our faces would be the trace lines of rivers, feeding the sea where voices meet, praising the features of the mountain and the cloud and the sky. Our faces would fall away until we, growing younger toward death every day, would gather all our flaws in celebration to merge with them perfectly, impossibly, wedded to our essence, full of silence from the carver's hands. Facing the world, facing our own disappearance, yeah. Which probably the rest of creation is quite relieved to see us go, you know? And we're holding on.
Oh, it's such a delight to listen to you. It's lovely, very lovely. I really enjoy every word you're saying. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
It's so funny that in the morning we also talked about that in the mystical understanding of death does not come after our birth. And I enjoy the words that you say that we are growing younger towards our death. That's a very beautiful way to describe what in duality here's my birth and here's my death. Mm-hmm. But in the deepening of my understanding of life, or my revelation, the revelation of life, that when death and birth are the same moment. I think that's a very interesting practice question. Mm-hmm. How to, because it appears on the surface of reality, it appears that here is my birth and here is death, and most probably most of the people we would ask would confirm that. Yeah. and so it's interesting to explore, okay, what actually is the meaning of death and birth not being a second apart. And so I think that's interesting. So we talked about that in the morning also.
Yes.
And then when you talked about Satish, I was wondering about how many people how many of us walk around with the feeling that needing something or wanting something, there's a beauty in needing something? Or how many of us had the experience in our own development that needing something is too much? And so when I hear about Satish being able to live fully the beauty of needing, so then you are part of the answer of becoming, of getting.
Yes.
And I think many people, when we reach out because we need something, there's actually some sort of strange feeling, from insecurity to shame to all kinds of feelings, too much. And that's how we were trained, and most probably that's also part of that we pass on to our children.
Yes.
So what's actually in the morning we also talked about the birthright being a being right and not the doing right. So what is when my right to be is enough for me to be as a child, and I don't have to take on a function of doing before I'm ready to do it. And so that actually a big part of our society is based upon a lack. If I don't feel like in myself a beauty when I need something to reach out and ask for it, so there's a chronic lack inside.
Yes.
Because the economy of taking in, inhaling and exhaling and inhaling and exhaling is not in alignment.
Yes.
And I think a lot of our world is built upon this kind of original lack.
Yes.
Which prevents us to feel originally abundant. Because if there's a beauty in needing, so needing is part of abundance. And if I feel awkward in reaching out to ask for support, to ask for anything that I need, to walk around with nothing and experiencing every day. So in the beauty of needing, I think there's an answer for our whole world economy in this aspect that you brought up.
Yeah. I love that emancipation of the word needing, because we use that as another pejorative, someone who's needy, and the needy part of yourself. But the beauty of needing, that's a lovely way of actually a way of understanding you're following your North Star somewhere. Yeah. And then everything you were saying about this transition of death, which is the ultimate test of everything we've lived, really. I always think you're going to have to give it all away at the end. So we're just part of that endless rehearsal of giving everything away before we have to give it all away. Yeah. And to be merciful and to forgive, that's everyone on their deathbed seems to want to both forgive and be forgiven. Yeah. And so why not start forgiving now? Yes. And my mother always used to say to me, if I was angry at someone, he said, if you knew the story as to why they'd made you angry, you wouldn't be angry. Yeah. And I said, well, how do you manage to do it all the time, Mother, without being angry? And she said, I just act as if I already know the story. Yeah. Yeah. So of what they've come through that creates that particular need in them. Yeah. But I think that might be we've come to the end of our time. Death's a good place to stop. No, I think the one philosophical relief about death is we're not supposed to understand it. Yes. So one place we can just give ourselves a rest. Yeah. By definition, we're not supposed to understand what death means. It's their ultimate philosophical vulnerability. Yeah. So it might be a good place to stop there. It's been an absolute pleasure, Thomas. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.